The Xeric Empire's arrival in Earth's atmosphere was a spectacle unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed. Their warships, massive, jagged behemoths the size of small moons, broke through the planet's protective orbit with a thunderous roar. They hovered ominously above the planet's surface, casting long, dark shadows across cities and oceans, a stark reminder of the devastation they could unleash. Their fleet, numbering in the thousands, filled the sky like a swarm of locusts. But this was no natural event. This was war. The Empire's flagship, a grotesque and imposing structure, took the lead. Its sleek obsidian hull gleamed menacingly in the light of the distant sun. From within its command center, Emperor Xeroth, supreme ruler of the Xeric Empire, sat upon his throne, his face impassive. For the last several days, his fleet had been moving through the galaxy, leaving behind a trail of conquered worlds. Planets had fallen to the Xeric war machine, civilizations crushed beneath their might, and Xeroth was certain that Earth, seemingly an insignificant blue dot in the vastness of space, would be no different. As his emissaries broadcasted the message to every corner of the planet, the terms were simple: surrender. All Earth's leaders, military forces, and civilians were to submit or face annihilation. Xeroth's voice, deep and commanding, filled every screen, every device, every broadcast station. People of Earth, you have no choice. The Xeric Empire has arrived. You are weak, fragmented, and primitive. We offer you a chance for survival. Surrender now, and your world will be spared. Refuse, and we will reduce your cities to ashes. The Empire demands your obedience. Comply, or face extinction. It was not a request. It was an ultimatum. The response from Earth, however, was not what Xeroth expected. There was no immediate panic, no desperate calls for resistance. Instead, the world seemed to pause. People turned to their leaders, their governments, to see what would happen next. What could they do against an enemy like this? What could any of them do? The silence that followed was deafening. Across the globe, governments convened in secret. Military leaders debated. Analysts scrambled to understand the scope of the threat. The United Nations assembled an emergency summit. For hours, world leaders from every nation communicated via encrypted channels, trying to coordinate a response. But nothing official was announced. No military forces mobilized. No nuclear missiles were launched. No fighter jets scrambled into the air. The entire world, for reasons unknown, fell into an eerie stillness. Not a single word came from Earth. The silence was almost worse than an outright declaration of war. Xeroth and his commanders watched with growing impatience as the hours dragged on, then days. The Empire's ships filled Earth's skies, and yet no military action was taken. No communications came from Earth. The humans had been silent. Was this part of their strategy? Xeroth wondered, his fingers tapping against his throne. Did they think their silence would intimidate us? Behind the Emperor's confident exterior, doubts began to creep in. Silence could mean many things, but this felt wrong. Humanity wasn't panicking. It wasn't pleading for mercy or preparing for an attack. It was simply waiting, and that, Xeroth thought, was a far more dangerous game than he had anticipated. Little did he know, Earth was preparing, but not in the way he expected. As the days passed with no response from Earth, Emperor Xeroth's patience wore thin. His advisors and generals, sensing his growing frustration, tried to offer explanations, but nothing seemed to ease the Emperor's unease. The silence was suffocating, unnerving. Every day that passed without Earth acknowledging the Empire's presence felt like an affront to his authority. Xeroth, a ruler accustomed to swift victories and absolute control, could not fathom what could cause such a passive, calculated inaction. His anger simmered, but in public, he remained composed, his voice unwavering as he broadcasted another message to Earth. People of Earth, Xeroth's voice boomed from every communication device, every screen. We have shown you mercy. You will now witness our strength. You will be made to understand your place in the galaxy. Your world's silence is your last mistake. We will show you the power of the Xeric Empire." The message was delivered with a cold finality. The tone was threatening, yet it conveyed a sense of growing irritation. A ruler who had long since run out of tolerance. As soon as the transmission ended, Xeroth's commanders issued orders to begin small-scale strikes. His fleet moved to the nearest group of Earth's satellites, launching pinpoint laser blasts that sent them careening toward the atmosphere. With the flick of a switch, Earth's communications were disrupted, static filling the airwaves, preventing anyone from communicating with the outside world. Yet Earth still did not respond. There were no signs of panic or military retaliation. No emergency broadcasts or cries for help. Just that same impenetrable silence. Xeroth's generals, increasingly concerned about the uncharacteristic calm, began to question whether they had made a miscalculation. How could a planet this isolated, this defenseless, remain so eerily still? The Empire had crushed entire civilizations within weeks, and yet here they were, facing a strange quietness that made their entire operation feel uncertain. "Emperor, perhaps they are just delaying their response," General Corrin suggested cautiously, his voice steady despite the rising tension in the room. "We should remain vigilant, but we are in full control. The silence cannot last forever." Xeroth turned toward him, his eyes sharp. "And what if it does, Corrin? What if Earth's silence is not an act of fear, but a sign of something far worse than we can comprehend?" His voice dropped to a growl. "I will not be made a fool of. Send in the second wave." The second wave was far more aggressive, a fleet of heavy dreadnoughts and assault cruisers, their weapons brimming with enough firepower to obliterate entire continents. They were positioned in a wide formation, casting an ominous shadow over Earth. The Imperial fleet, once confident in its superiority, now bristled with the anticipation of an inevitable victory. Xeroth ordered a full bombardment of Earth's major cities. If humanity wanted to remain silent, then they would be taught the true meaning of devastation. The first wave of missiles launched from the Empire's flagship, cutting through the vacuum of space with deadly precision. They screamed toward Earth, and upon impact, huge plumes of fire erupted in the sky. Great cities, New York, Tokyo, Paris, erupted in violent explosions. The power of the Empire's weaponry was undeniable. Earth had been struck, and Xeroth's voice rang out again. "Earth, you have chosen to defy the Empire. We will not be so merciful next time. This is your final warning." And yet, despite the monumental devastation, Earth did not scream in pain. There was no outcry, no retaliation. Even with cities burning, Earth's silence continued. Xeroth clenched his fists, his mind racing. It didn't make sense. Was this the way a defeated species reacted? His every instinct screamed that something was wrong. There was a part of him that feared what would happen if the humans had prepared for this moment, if they were, in fact, simply biding their time. He had underestimated them, but the Emperor wouldn't admit it, not yet. The silence was an insult. He would break it. Earth's silence would be shattered. The Empire's bombardment had been devastating. The cities of Earth burned as orbital strikes turned entire metropolises into smoldering ruins. Yet the silence persisted, a deadening void hanging over the ruins of what had once been thriving populations. Xeroth watched from the bridge of his flagship, his face twisted in growing frustration. The humans had yet to launch any kind of meaningful defense. The grand fleets he had sent were unchallenged, and even the Earth's leaders seemed to have disappeared into the abyss of their own helplessness. "Your Majesty," General Corrin spoke hesitantly, "it seems they are not responding to our attacks. Perhaps we should increase the intensity. A second bombardment could finish this." Xeroth's eyes narrowed, his voice like ice. "No, they're playing a game with us. Earth is not so weak. They may not understand the concept of war, but they understand survival. Their silence is a calculated tactic, not fear. His suspicions proved eerily accurate when, just as he prepared to issue the next order, a single transmission crackled over the comms. It was unexpected, and for a moment, Taroth thought it might be an intergalactic plea for mercy, but the message that filled the air was nothing like what he expected. The transmission wasn't an apology or a cry for help. It was a challenge. "We are still here," came a calm, almost serene voice, "and you will regret underestimating us." The transmission was cut off before Xarath could process the meaning. His eyes darted to his officers, who stared back at him with similar bewilderment. There was no military force visible in the transmission, no sign of rebellion, just the eerie sense that something far more dangerous was lurking beneath the surface. Before the Emperor could fully digest what had happened, his bridge was shaken by a violent tremor. The flagship's instruments flared, flashing red as alarms began to blare. A fleet of unidentified ships, impossibly fast and invisible to their sensors, had appeared from nowhere. The ships were cloaked. Advanced stealth technology, the likes of which the Empire had never seen before. No one had been able to detect their approach. The first strike came without warning. A precise, surgical shot from one of the invisible ships pierced the Empire's flagship, directly targeting its energy core. The ship groaned, its massive hull creaking as the lights flickered and the outer shields flared to life. But it was too late. A burst of energy detonated from within the ship's core, sending shockwaves that rattled the very fabric of the flagship. The fleet fell into disarray as the cloaked ships continued to dart in and out of the Empire's defense grids, striking with deadly efficiency. Xeric warships that once seemed invincible were torn apart by a series of calculated strikes, each blow landing where it would do the most damage. Fighters launched into the void, but they were met with nothing but empty space, unable to target the elusive vessels. Saroth's rage was palpable. "How is this possible?" he roared. "Who dares to challenge the Empire?" But it wasn't a challenge, not in the way Saroth had imagined. It was a statement, a warning. The humans weren't trying to defeat the Empire. They were making it clear that they had control of the battlefield. On Earth's surface, military forces began to mobilize, but it wasn't through conventional means. From underground bunkers, hidden military bases, and secret research facilities, Earth's hidden technology began to surface. The weapons used to strike the Empire's fleet were only the beginning. Humanity had kept their technological advancements hidden, allowing the Empire to assume Earth was a primitive backwater. But now, the Empire was learning the hard way that Earth was far more prepared than they had ever dreamed. The Emperor's face twisted with fury as he watched another warship disappear into nothingness, crumpling like paper in the vacuum of space. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This was not a primitive race. Earth had been holding back. And now, for the first time in his life, Xarath began to wonder if the Xeric Empire had made its most fatal mistake, underestimating the humans. It was no longer about intimidation. Earth was no longer silent. Earth was fighting back. Xarath's once unshakable confidence began to fracture with each passing hour. His flagship, once an awe-inspiring symbol of the Xeric Empire's might, now limped through space, its core struggling to maintain its integrity. The Empire's fleet had suffered unspeakable losses, and yet the silent humans kept striking, invisible and relentless. The scale of their response, the sheer precision of it, defied all expectations. Aboard the flagship, the atmosphere had turned from arrogance to panic. Xarath paced the command center, his fists clenched in anger. His fleet was in disarray, unable to predict the humans' movements. They had no visible ships, no clear lines of attack, and yet their strikes were devastating, as if the very fabric of space itself was working against him. "Your Majesty," General Corrin's voice trembled as he entered the room. "We've lost contact with 3 of our outer squadrons. Entire fleets have vanished without a trace. We've been struck again by something we cannot track." "Something?" Xarath snapped, his voice a low growl. He stopped pacing and turned to face his general, eyes burning with fury. "Explain, Koran. What is happening?" "Nothing is making sense," Koran replied, his own frustration evident. "We have advanced technologies, the most sophisticated tracking systems in the galaxy, and yet these ships, these unknown assailants, are simply disappearing. It's as if they're controlling the very nature of space itself. It's like they're folding reality around them." Sarath's mind raced, but before he could respond, the alarms began to blare once again, signaling another attack. This time, it wasn't just a hit-and-run strike. The entire fleet felt it. An immense surge of energy emanating from the outskirts of Earth's orbit, a wave of sheer power so concentrated it seemed to warp space. The Xeric ships moved into formation, trying desperately to regroup and counter the energy blast. But before they could react, the Earth's weaponry revealed itself fully for the first time. Orbital platforms, hidden satellites previously unnoticed by the Empire, unleashed a series of devastating pulses. These weapons, unlike anything the Xeric Empire had ever encountered, had the power to disable entire ships with a single shot. In an instant, more Xeric warships fell from the sky, their massive forms flickering and collapsing under the intensity of the attacks. It wasn't just firepower. It was a disruption of the fundamental laws of motion, something that sent shockwaves through the Empire's ranks. The rest of the Empire's fleet was caught off guard. Desperately, the Xeric commanders issued orders to reposition, to attempt to find the source of these new attacks. But every time they thought they had a lock on the enemy's location, it slipped away. There were no human ships in sight, no visible forces to retaliate against. It was as if the very atmosphere had become their enemy. "Koran." Xerath's voice was strained. "Tell me we're not losing to a race of primitive mammals." "We are. Losing, Your Majesty," Koran admitted, his eyes wide with disbelief. "The humans have weapons we didn't even know existed. They are warping space and bending our technology to their will. They're playing a game we don't understand." Alaroth felt the weight of that admission hit him like a physical blow. The humans, so seemingly insignificant, had turned the tables. His fleet, once an unstoppable force, was now scattered, outpaced, and disoriented. The Xeric Empire, for all its might, was now struggling against a foe who refused to fight in ways they could comprehend. "This will not stand," Xerath said, his voice low and deadly. "Prepare the fleet for a final assault. We will show them what true power is." But deep within the Emperor's heart, a nagging fear took root. Earth was no longer the helpless world he had once believed it to be. The humans had exposed a truth. Their silence was not submission. It was the calm before the storm. And now, that storm was about to break in ways Xerath could never have imagined. The Xeric Empire's once unshakable grip on the galaxy was slipping, and every passing moment seemed to tighten the noose around their necks. Xerath's frustration had long since given way to something darker, a creeping panic that spread through the ranks of his commanders and generals. They were no longer facing a foe they could crush with overwhelming force. They were facing a force that had become their equal, perhaps even their superior. From the safety of his flagship, Xerath ordered the deployment of the Empire's most powerful weapon, the obsidian cannon. It was a fearsome creation, an ancient weapon designed to destroy entire worlds. With its power, Xerath was certain that nothing would survive the onslaught, not even the hidden technology Earth had so carefully kept from view. "We end this now," Xerath muttered to himself, pacing once again in his command center. "If the humans have shown us their hand, then we show them ours." The obsidian cannon was positioned and locked onto Earth's northern hemisphere. It was a weapon of mass destruction unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The sheer scale of its power could wipe out entire continents in a single shot. The Empire was willing to burn Earth to the ground if it meant asserting their dominance once more. As the countdown began, a small, fleeting thought crossed Xerath's mind. What if Earth had anticipated this? What if they were ready? He pushed the thought aside. There was no time for hesitation now. This was the endgame. But then, a ripple in space itself caused his thoughts to scatter. The ship's sensors detected something. A signal. Traveling through the void, faster than light. It was a pulse of energy, but unlike any they had seen before. It was as though the very laws of physics were being bent. "Captain," Xerath barked, his voice sharp. "Report. What is that signal?" The captain's voice shook as he responded, his fingers flying over the control panels. "It's impossible, Your Majesty. The signal, it's coming from Earth itself. But it's not like anything we've encountered. It's not a ship, it's not a weapon. It's a message. A message." The thought lingered in Xerath's mind. Earth, in all its silence, had found a way to reach into the very heart of the Empire, even from the depths of space. The transmission flickered to life on the screens in front of him. And the calm, collected voice of a human scientist, a woman who appeared in the holographic display, spoke with unnerving confidence. "Emperor Xerath, your conquest ends here." Xerath froze. His blood turned cold. How could this be? The message came without threat, without arrogance, but with an undeniable certainty. The woman on the screen continued, her voice unwavering. "We have been preparing for you, for your arrogance, for your underestimation of us. You will not destroy us. You will not win." Xerath felt his heartbeat quicken as the woman's words echoed through the command center. "You cannot conquer a species that has already mastered the greatest weapon in the universe, time." The final words hung in the air like a death sentence. We control time. And now, the countdown ends. Before Xerath could respond, the pulse of energy intensified, surging through space like a storm. His flagship's systems began to glitch, warping and distorting as if reality itself was unraveling. Then, with a sudden jolt, the entire fleet was thrown into chaos. The obsidian cannon, still locked onto its target, malfunctioned as time itself seemed to fracture. Moments stretched and twisted, causing the fleet to lose its cohesion. Ships that had once been in one place now appeared in another. Entire battalions were displaced in time, their movements disjointed and unpredictable. The Empire's military, once a well-oiled machine, was now an uncoordinated mess, its tactics rendered useless as Earth's weapon triggered a temporal distortion that even the mighty Xeric Empire could not understand. Xerath staggered back, his mind struggling to process the implications of the message. Time. How could humans control such a thing? It was an absurdity, a concept beyond the comprehension of even the most advanced civilizations. And yet, Earth had done it. The realization hit like a tidal wave. The humans were not only capable of fighting back, they had a weapon that could undo the very foundations of the Empire's might. Xerath's pride, his belief in the Empire's invincibility, lay in ruins. The Empire was no longer in control. Xerath's world, his empire, was crumbling in real time. The once unshakable structure of his command center was now in chaos. Time was no longer a constant, and the very fabric of reality seemed to warp and stretch. Every decision Xerath made, every command he issued, was undermined by the temporal distortions that Earth's mysterious weapon had triggered. His fleet was lost, scattered across space, unable to coordinate their attacks or retreat. "Report." Xerath's voice cracked as he turned toward his shaken commanders, but no one had an answer. The Xeric technology, known for its near perfection, had been rendered useless. His officers could only stare at the monitors, their faces pale as they tried to make sense of the mayhem unfolding before them. The woman's voice, so calm and confident, echoed in his mind. "We control time. How could this be? How could the humans, those fragile, insignificant creatures, have developed such power?" The concept of manipulating time was something even the greatest minds in the Empire could only theorize about, a fantasy. But now, Earth had proven it could wield such a weapon with ease. The unthinkable had become reality. Saroth's anger flared again, but this time it was tinged with desperation. His empire, which had crushed countless worlds with nothing more than sheer force, had now met an opponent that was not only capable of resisting them, but was mastering the battlefield. Humanity had shown that they could manipulate the very flow of time. It was beyond belief. "Recalibrate the systems," General Corrin ordered, his voice steady but strained. "We need to regain control over the fleet. If we can isolate the source of their weapon." "We can't." Kazaroth interrupted, his voice low and trembling with rage. "We're being torn apart. We don't have the technology to fight this." "We." Before he could finish, another violent distortion rocked the flagship, sending the crew stumbling. Lights flickered and alarms blared, signaling another temporal fluctuation. A massive Xeric destroyer, once several kilometers away, suddenly appeared right beside the flagship, its massive hull disorienting the crew. It was as though space itself was playing tricks, forcing the ship to collide with its own fleet. The damage was catastrophic. Hull breaches opened in multiple locations, and the flagship's core began to destabilize. Kazaroth gritted his teeth. His empire, his perfect, unassailable force, was lost. It was no longer a question of winning. It was a matter of survival. In the blink of an eye, the flagship's viewports displayed another startling sight. Dozens of Earth's stealth ships, their cloaking devices flickering in and out of phase, now surrounded the remnants of the Xeric fleet. These ships, seemingly ordinary in shape but clearly advanced beyond anything the Empire could fathom, hovered with a silent, ominous presence. Saruth's mind raced, and his hands trembled as he slammed his fist on the command table. "Where is their military? Why aren't they showing themselves?" He growled. "They're everywhere," Corrin replied, voice edged with fear. "We've been under attack from all angles, and we can't predict where they'll strike next. It's like they're everywhere at once. We don't know how they're doing it, but they're controlling space, controlling time itself. Enough." Saruth screamed, his anger bubbling over. "I will not be defeated by these insignificant creatures." But even as he shouted, his mind struggled to suppress the growing fear. This was it. The Xeric Empire was being destroyed, not by military might, but by a force that couldn't be touched or fought with conventional weapons. The truth hung heavy in the air. Earth was not just defending itself. They were reshaping the rules of engagement. Saruth had been so confident in the Empire's invulnerability, so sure of their superiority, that he had never anticipated a world like Earth, one that was capable of bending the universe itself to its will. Another flash of light blinded the command center, and the flagship's systems flickered. For a brief moment, Saruth saw something on his screens. A giant, temporal tear, a rip in space, beginning to form directly in front of his ship. His eyes widened in horror. This was no mere attack. It was catastrophic. The humans' control over time had reached a new level. The tear in space began to grow, pulling everything in its path toward the void. Kazaroth had no time to think, no time to issue orders. The fleet was unraveling, the systems failing, and the very nature of reality was collapsing around him. Kazaroth could only stare in stunned silence as his empire, the powerful, unyielding force that had crushed so many worlds, faced its inevitable end. The humans had outsmarted them, outmaneuvered them, and now they were going to watch the Empire fall apart. The great Emperor stood frozen before the chaos, realizing too late that the tide had turned irrevocably in favor of Earth. Saruth stood on the precipice of defeat, his vision clouded with the swirling chaos of the collapsing flagship. The temporal rift before him was growing exponentially, pulling in everything it touched with an insidious force that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of the Empire. His hands trembled as he gripped the console before him, desperately trying to keep control of his ship and fleet, but it was futile. The Xeric Empire had reached its end. Around him, his commanders were scrambling. The crew rushed to execute futile commands, but no one was in control anymore. The time distortions had shredded their communication networks, and the fleet was scattered across space, trapped in pockets of warped time and space. There were no more coordinated efforts, no unified fronts. The once proud Xeric warships now drifted aimlessly, half-formed in one moment, fully materialized in the next. Even the stars themselves seemed to flicker in and out of existence, as though the very cosmos was buckling under the weight of the human weapon. "Your Majesty, we're losing all structural integrity," one of his officers shouted, but the words barely registered. The flagship's hull was warping, and the once glorious ship began to tear itself apart at the seams. Sarath's mind raced. He could feel his empire slipping away. He could see it disintegrating before him, his entire legacy falling to ruin. There was no victory here. There would be no glory in conquest, no banners raised in triumph. The humans had defied every expectation, outsmarting him at every turn, and now their mastery over time had become the final blow. Earth wasn't just fighting back. They had weaponized fate itself. He stumbled back as another violent tremor rocked the ship. A piece of debris tore through the command center, missing Xerath by mere inches. He didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed on the monitors, watching as more of his fleet dissolved into temporal anomalies, vanishing without a trace. His empire was collapsing. "We cannot escape this." General Corrin's voice echoed in his earpiece, filled with a hollow resignation. "We are being erased from existence." Sarath's breath caught in his throat. He could hear the panic in Corrin's voice, something he had never thought possible. He had been the one to lead the empire to greatness, to destroy countless civilizations, but now it was his turn to be erased. His empire would be a footnote in the annals of time, a forgotten attempt at conquest that ended in nothing. Heteroth turned, his eyes burning with a final, desperate fury. "Prepare the escape pods," he growled. "We will not go down without a fight." But even as he barked the order, deep inside, he knew it was hopeless. Earth's temporal weapon had done more than cripple their fleet. It had shattered their ability to escape. Any attempt to flee was futile. The rift was everywhere, inescapable. Space had become a cage, and time itself was the key. The Xeric Empire had no more future. It was then that the message came again, this time direct and clear, a single transmission that cut through the distortions like a knife. "Xerath," the voice said, cool and unbothered. It was the same woman from the earlier transmission, the one who had delivered the chilling warning. "I hope this has been an enlightening lesson. The Xeric Empire has long had the delusion of superiority over others, but you should have known that a species that is prepared to fight for its future cannot be defeated so easily." Sarath's fists clenched, his jaw grinding. He could not look away from the message. It had become clear now. This wasn't just a war for Earth. This was a war for survival. The woman's voice continued. "You believed you could control all of existence. You believed that with enough firepower and arrogance, you could bend the universe to your will. You were wrong. Your empire was built on the broken backs of others. But it is you who will break now." The transmission cut out, but the weight of those words hung heavy in the air. "It is you who will break now." Sarath's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground. The gravity of what he had unleashed, the hubris, the cruelty, the destruction, was now at his doorstep. He could feel the tendrils of time closing in around him, pulling his empire from the timeline, erasing it, his legacy, his power, vanishing into nothingness. His mind, once filled with visions of domination, now spiraled in realization. The empire had not been defeated by mere strength, but by the very thing that it had disregarded, time itself. And it was time that would consume him. As the Xeric fleet vanished into the ripples of time, Xerath could only watch in stunned silence. His empire, his life's work, was being erased piece by piece, the temporal rift growing ever wider as the final remnants of his once great military force were consumed by the collapse. The stars around him seemed to flicker, then disappear altogether, as though the very essence of the Xeric Empire was being wiped from the cosmos. Saroth's breathing came in ragged gasps, the weight of his failure sinking in. He had conquered countless worlds, crushed entire civilizations underfoot, and yet here he was, at the mercy of a race he had once deemed insignificant. The humans, with their bizarre, fragile bodies and primitive technology, had brought him to his knees, not through brute force, but through something far more powerful: time. It was the one thing the Xeric Empire had never expected to be challenged by, and it was the very thing that had brought them to ruin. Saroth's mind swirled with thoughts of his empire's legacy, the countless worlds that had fallen to their might, the fear they had inspired across the galaxy. And now, it was gone. Nothing would remain of the Xeric Empire but fragments, scattered through the annals of time, lost to the ages. Aboard the flagship, the crew was silent, the chaos of the command center now a quiet tomb. The walls, once vibrant with the pride of the Empire, were now stained with the remnants of a lost war. The lights flickered one last time, and then everything went dark. The great flagship of the Xeric Empire, the vessel that had once struck terror into the hearts of billions, was now adrift, a hollow shell floating aimlessly in the void. Saroth was alone in the silence. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be powerless, to be truly vulnerable. He, who had crushed countless worlds under the weight of the Empire's will, had now become the object of their own destruction. The thought gnawed at him like a ravenous beast. Then the message came again. This time, there was no voice, no holographic display. It was simply a presence, an overwhelming, undeniable force. It was as though the very fabric of the universe had spoken directly to him, echoing through every corner of his being. Saroth, this is not your universe to control. The time of empires built on fear and conquest is over. Earth has claimed its future, and with it, the future of all life. Saroth's eyes widened. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but there was no energy left in him. His body felt heavy, as if the weight of his own failure was pressing down on him. The message continued, its power resonating in his chest like the beating of a distant drum. You have lost, not because you lacked strength, but because you failed to understand what makes a species truly powerful. It is the will to survive. Saroth sank to his knees, his chest heaving, as the last remnants of his empire were swallowed by time itself. He had been defeated by the very thing he had never understood, a force that transcended physical might, a force that was not bound by the limits of space or time. Earth had not only survived, they had embraced the true power of existence. On Earth, far from the wreckage of the Xeric fleet, humanity had begun to rebuild. They had proven their resilience, their ingenuity, and their unity in the face of an empire that had sought to crush them. The world, once on the brink of destruction, now stood on the cusp of a new era. As the stars above shimmered once again, humanity looked up with newfound hope. The message of their victory was clear. The universe was not one to be conquered. It was one to be understood, respected, and nurtured. Earth had not just defeated the Xeric Empire. They had redefined the very nature of what it meant to be a force in the cosmos. The silence that had once been their greatest weapon was now their greatest strength. Earth had answered the Empire's declaration of war, not with destruction, but with a message to the galaxy. We are here to stay.